I've been having these weird thoughts lately. Like, is any of this for real? Or not?
A scattered dream that's like a far-off memory. A far-off memory that's like a scattered dream. I want to line the pieces up. Yours and mine. They can take your world. They can take your heart. Cut you loose from all you know. But if it's your fate, then every step forward will always be a step closer to home.
Something the Kingdom Hearts series is well known for at this point is having really tight, stable gameplay that allows you to weave in attacks and magic and combo them into spectacular animations that really show off what each system is capable of at the time of its initial release. Well, for the numbered titles, that is. The others were released on handhelds that kind of gimp the raw power the series is known for, and while the numbered titles all have different strengths and weaknesses that make them shine in regards to their elder or younger siblings, there's no real denying they're all fun in their own way, and that's what I want to look at today. What makes each of these games so different and yet so similar at the same time? I'll be looking at a variety of factors such as level design, enemy design, encounter design, boss design, and so on and so forth. Along with that, giving them a number ranking that will add up at the end. And well, yes, about a year ago I did a big end of year thing for KH3 and why I think it's the best when you look at it divorced from the baggage of being in 2 Shadow. I won't let my bias get the best of me. There are things the other two shine in better than 3 and vice versa. So join me, won't you, as we... Oh, we can't do that one today. Let's try come with me as we compare and contrast, discern and derive the quality of these games. Yeah, I like that. Kingdom Hearts 1 has fairly decent combat for the first attempt of a real-time action in Final Fantasy Elements hybrid. It's not perfect, we'll get into that in a second, but let me take a second to spin KH1's teething problems into a positive. While I find subsequent playthroughs to be a bit of a grind and a slog given the leveling system, I have to say that you get to feel how Sora grows and becomes more powerful than the other two games. See, in KH2 your only real limit early on is the length of your Keyblade, but after you start getting Quick Run and the like, you end up mitigating a lot of problems that game and KH1 share. 3 has its own problem where with the foreign changes giving you random abilities and changing up the combat in each world, it means that crowd control options, which is all of them, become more viable. However, that means Sora stays pretty consistently powerful throughout the playthrough. More on that when we get to KH3 itself though. In Kingdom Hearts 1, the difficulty came from 3 things: how hard enemies hit, the abilities and ability points you have to manage at any given time, and what stats the Keyblade you currently have are, given that the only real difference is a number clash. This is why, for example, the Ultimate Weapon has the best strength, but Diamond Dust has the best magic. No one option is best for every encounter. Enemy damage is pretty hit or miss. Get it? I'm terrible. In early game, the danger came from mob fights rather than singular enemies. The most likely thing to kill you are some fat bodies charging at you and like one swipe from a shadow, but that's because out of any other game, your defense is the weakest in this one. Now, knowing when to dodge and guarding is important and will save your ass as much as spamming X can, it's just that in early game, that's all you've got. Sora is controlled by how many ability points he has, and thus how many flashing abilities or combo modifiers or even limits you can use at any given time. The problem is, unless you're picking the shield, you're basically fucking yourself. Maybe the rod if you really wanted those big finishers, but that was a long shot. Why is that? Well, the Dream Shield gave you access to the 2 most critical abilities in the game: Leaf Bracer, which made you impervious while casting Cure, and Second Chance, which always left you alive if you got hit, provided you had more than 1 hit point to start with. Putting both of these abilities together made Sora practically invincible. The Dream Sword is basically asking for a harder time. Sure, you can get Scan and Sliding Dash a bit sooner, but that's quite literally the only benefit despite the strength, and even then it's like 1 or 2 at best. The Dream Shield also gave you more health and defense, so it's meant to be the path of least resistance because no player player wants to get the life-saving abilities at level Boss Blender. Honestly, it's akin to old Kanto Pokemon games. If you pick the Cabbage Shield, you'll do fine. It has the least hurdles and the most benefits to gain. If you pick the Dragon Sword, which sounds awesome by the way, that requires a lot more planning and strategy to even begin to have fun with. And then there's the Squirting Rod, which lands you somewhere in the middle. Sora's slow growth is something that no other title in the series nails in such a way. KH2 goes from kinda clunky to butter smooth in like one world's worth of grinding, and 3 has so many options and such a floaty system that it ends up feeling like you're gaining abilities for the sake of it rather than having them affect your arsenal in a mega way all the time. However, there are 2 decisions that have always baffled me with this game, especially in the final mix versions and all the ports, those being Scan and Guard. First of all, you don't start the game with Scan, the most basic ability that any game worth their salt lets you have. Every other game I've ever come across that has some form of combat as its main focus has a health bar available from the get-go, and the fact they haven't patched it in to be a base ability at like 1 AP is fucking stupid. I shouldn't have to wait till the middle of the game to figure out what kind of health bar I'm facing. It's why stuff like Opposite Armor and Cerberus is so annoying, because I can't tell if I should go for a hit and run or go for the combo to kill him off. Guard is also stupid. Why is it not a base ability? I mean, they added Slapshot pretty early so that you can keep swinging through attacks, but honestly, add that in later in place of Guard and give Guard first. It's not that complicated. I will say that stuff like Ripple Drive and the like are fun, but they come so late that most people aren't gonna level up that high unless they're doing secret bosses, and even then Cheese is a way to win most of those. Those abilities though are more for crowd control, which this game isn't super amazing at given its limitations at release. The magic system seems directly lifted from something like the original Final Fantasy VII. You have Fire and Blizzard as projectiles, you have Thunder as a mid to long range attack for airborne or fast enemies, Arrow as a discount barrier, Stop as a free damage spam, and Gravity, well, I don't quite get the point of that one outside the Maleficent fights and the floating chests in Hollow Bastion. Magic had one main job: deal damage, and even base spells are godsends in this game. Summons overall are basically the same thing. You have 4 that deal damage and just clear rooms, you have Tink who is your get out of death free card, and then you have Bambi who is really only helpful for special Heartless. Summons are fine here, but I'd be lying if I said I ever really use them given that I fucking forget they're a thing until Dragon Maleficent. The overall biggest problem with this game is the slow way Sora moves to make the levels seem bigger, along with the close camera and how fiddly it can be sometimes, something the rest of the series would fix. Kingdom Hearts 2 is the poster child of the franchise for, well, basically everything up until 3. I can understand that. There's simply no debate in it, given that all that came before and after due to their hardware limitations. Something like Days or Birth by Sleep would have been vastly improved by being on the PS3. Dream Drop Distance is the only one that comes close to emulating how it would feel to play KH2 on a handheld. KH2 combat can be summed up in one word: variety. Lots and lots of variety. I hesitate to say options because that's one where 3 shines, but KH2 has variety in terms of how you swing your Keyblade and how it's woven into the magic system. Magic in and of itself was reworked from KH1, in that they replaced Arrow with Reflect, Gravity with Magnet, and changed Fire from another projectile into this weird spin attack, which for me was only really helpful with the Data Demics and Vexen fights because of how close and how much damage it does to the water clones and the shield. Other than that, I stuck with Blizzard, Magnet, and Thunder for my non-cure options. Reflect is fine, don't get me wrong, and can help in some of those more prickly fights, looking at you, Terra, but really it doesn't register unless I'm fighting Sephiroth on a constant basis or I'm feeling lazy on crit. The real focus in KH2 is the drive forms, which, well, I tore into those in Legacy of Kingdom Hearts 3, so I don't want to go in too much depth here. Suffice to say, they lock critical abilities behind them for no real reason other than inflating the game's challenge. KH1 and 3 give you things like high jump and double flight or super glide at the right moment for where you are in the game. And, well, yes, high jump being hidden in this randomly appearing chest on the middle of the boat in Monstro is dumb. Stupid random shit. I will give those games credit, they didn't make those things optional outside of your ability points. 2 did. In order to even get access to, say, the base level of high jump, you must use Valor Form for most, if not all, the time you spend in either Land of Dragons or Beast's Castle. To me, that is unacceptable. It's needless progression halting for nothing. The only tangible benefit to using drive forms outside of getting their growth abilities is leveling your drive meter for every respective form. Which, side note, I do not understand why you can only have the max drive count of 8 until you beat Lingering Will. He wasn't even in the original game, so what was the fucking point of adding this? I should be able to walk up to the final boss with all of my drive bars filled at 9. Also, why in the ever-living fuck did you lock all of them besides Limit Form from this fight? It wasn't even available in the base game. So let me get this straight, Square. You spend the whole game demanding players grind for these forms to even be viable as combat options, lock high jump, dodge roll, fucking dodge roll, double flight, glide, and quick run, which I'll give you that one, that seems kind of a throwaway one to me, and then strip them of the cool thing you've given them for the final boss room? Like, yes, KH1 does do this to a point in that Donald and Goofy are gone for most of the final boss gauntlet, but they weren't the keys to your most powerful abilities. The only thing they stopped you from doing was using summons, which you're in the air for this fight, so fuck it, who cares? I need to make this clear. Using and unlocking drive forms is great, however, how they gate progression and leveling each of them up, seeing as the current number of drive forms you have dictates the max level you can reach with them at one time, is frustrating and annoying. Drive forms don't break the game. They're not allowed to, given how each time you hit something the gauge drops faster than if you were just standing there. The only real problem I talked about with them in the bigger video was that they acted like a last resort heal when you were in danger, and with the constant loom of anti-form as a what the fuck factor, the game punishes you for abusing them, so there is a checks and balance system. Anti-form, for me, is a little bonus, provided you take the time to learn its limitations. You can't heal, and this moveset is rather jerky, but look at this damage output. Look at how you can decimate a boss with him. Anti-form is an intended punishment for relying on the drive forms to the detriment of Sora's normal form. It's obvious that's what its intended purpose is, given the little bastard eats your drive gauge regardless of what form you were trying to use. But hey, who gives a fuck about any of that when you can do this? These are the moments of glory we all crave. It doesn't have to happen all the time, but when it does, it just makes you love a game so much more. Despite how much these forms take to get any real use out of them, they're still one of the most memorable things about the game. Well, besides the ability list. Oh yeah, we're not moving on quite yet. In KH1, you were limited by how many abilities you could use by how tight Sora's AP points were without items or accessories. So to counter most challenges, you had your trusty cheese combo, scan, dodge roll, and guard, but every other ability was up to you and how you wanted to use them, and if you wanted to use the limits you got from Cloud and the like. In Kingdom Hearts 2, this idea was scrapped. Sora now gets scanned at the start of the game from beating Axel as Roxas. Guard is now a default ability, and the cheese trio is given to you in much better intervals regardless of which dream item you chose. Remember how I said in KH1 the shield was the only real option because of the health, defense, and ability layout? Well, now that idea was being reworked to be more balanced between the three, especially since strength and defense boosts are everywhere and much easier to meld than in the first game. The number of abilities Sora could equip skyrocketed, and stuff like Dodge Slash were thrown in to act as honeypots to make sure you pay attention to what you use so as to not get fucked by a boss, since the move literally misses half of its hits. Not to mention the fact AP boosts are fucking everywhere. It doesn't take long before Sora has more ability points than he knows what to do with, and so you're just equipping everything in sight. I've actually reached the max AP point total at one point. I think it was like 280 or something, but seriously, I had more points that I could use. I think that says a lot about a game's design when they want you to use everything. That's not to say it's all perfect though. Like for instance, you don't really get a lot of new Keyblades till the middle of the game. In 1 you get Jungle Key and then have to wait till Agrabah to get 3 wishes. But from there it's one right after another. And yeah, you get one from Land of Dragons, but all that does is give you damage MP, which gives you magic relative to the amount of damage taken. But after that you go to Beast's Castle without a new one, are forced to do Timeless River where you get a fairly decent one, and then from there you start getting them more and more frequently. But it sure as fuck feels a lot longer than it is. And in KH1's case, it's practically the middle of the game before you start getting new ones outside of Jungle King. Now looking to KH3, we have what I think is a more refined sense of both these games put together in a more logical way. First of all, you are restricted to one style of play for half the game, and in most cases, bosses and enemies are designed with the previous world's form change in mind. For example, Olympus is filled with stuff like Flame Cores and Darklings, which pack a punch but are fewer in numbers, given the fact the only form change you have on a regular playthrough is the Kingdom Key, which deals with smaller groups better than, say, the Endless Swarm of Heartless in the finale. Corona is more designed around the Hyper Hammer because it's canonically the second proper world, so enemies are more susceptible to stuff like finish spamming since most of them are ground enemies, unlike say Arendelle where they have more flying enemies, given that the Agile Claws are more for freeform movement than anything else. Something I will throw shit at this game for is the difficulty curve. Well, yes, I understand why Standard and Proud are so similar. What would have made it better is that during the crit patch they fixed Proud mode's damage scaling. See, whereas every other game in the series has a rather smooth difficulty layout from beginning to critical, KH3 doesn't. The team didn't add critical till about 3 months after the game's initial launch, which is fine, but all they heard was the first 3 modes were too easy, and so basically went from beginner, beginner plus, standard in KH2, and then murder me now, why is this so hard, rather than tweaking the other modes to accommodate the change crit would add to the game. Now, Proud mode in KH1 is a little unfair, but that's basically that game's crit, so I understand, and once you get to level 50, you should be fine. KH2 is much the same, only crit mode halves your defense and health and increases your damage output. Not by much, but enough that you're not fucked. KH3's just halves everything to appease the loud minority that was baying at the moon for the curb stomp they wanted and fuck everyone else that wants a challenge. Now, I can get why this could be the case. Because the form changes pack so much more of a punch and add so many more variables than the drive forms had, and with the addition of New Game Plus giving you previous save files keyblades, including the ultimate weapon, they can't technically account for what you'll have on any given playthrough besides the base game keyblades. Still think it was a bit of an overcorrection though. Alright, enough of being an asshole, let's get back to some positives. First, New Game Plus is fun and lets you have more freedom than any other game in the franchise when it comes to how you play it. Since this was never patched into any game, even the HD ports, the feeling of most games stays the same. Oh look, a new keyblade.
A few moments later.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
This also points to why the Keyblade upgrade system is so good. If you only stick to a few of your faves and aren't a weirdo like me that has to have all of them at max level as soon as I can. See, on a base playthrough, you can get everything maxed out relatively easily, but on a New Game Plus file, it's just impossible sometimes. Not that it's hard, it's just a lot of grinding and gummy ship flying. The saving grace of it all is that you can buy Fluorite in the shop in Monstropolis about halfway through. Another thing I love is that you can switch Keyblades and perform different combos since the game remembers where you are in the combo and lets you continue it in that form change. And it's just fun, I can't lie. Mirage Staff is broken as fuck. That's all I have to say on it. I love it, and it's broken, and I don't care. Magic in and of itself is weird, and not just because every type of form change has different styles of magic, which I love given how it affects combat, and you can't just spam thunder in every situation. You have to think about what forms you have and how it will affect things. My favorite type is the one that shoots like a projectile. That just makes it more fun since you have to aim it a bit more than in other cases. Anyway, so each of these games have weird gates that hold the Za level of each spell. No, I will not let this go. This legit pisses me off. Why the hell did you lock the third thunder spell behind the optional boss in the Pride Lands, you bastards? KH1 has some weird things as well, like for instance you need all the Dalmatians to get, I think, 2 spells? I know you need all of them for the second level of the Arrow spell, and you find another version of the spell in the pirate ship with the Yellow Trinity. A lot of spells are gated weirdly in that game now that I think about it, so in that regard it loses points, but it sure as fuck makes more sense than what 2 and 3 did. For example, you typically get Thunder in Olympus. It makes sense, son of the god of lightning, the world gives you lightning. KH3 gives it to you in Toy Box, which, okay, sure, electricity powers toys, I'll give you that. But why do you get Aurora in San Fran and then Aroga less than 2 fucking hours later? And it's not like before where you can miss one of them, they're both demanded by the story. Same with Cure. Cure is given to you in Twilight Town, then Monstropolis, then the final Demon Tower fight, right after you get Aroga. I feel like that's just too quick together and yet still not far enough apart. I will say this game takes the versatility you got in 2, in where you can mix and match magic into your combos, and took that shit right up to 11. Not only can you do that, but with the added benefit of shot stepping and shot lock slowing down time, it makes for a much more interesting experience since you can practically do anything. Not to mention you can air dodge or dodge roll out of most attacks, and it saves you from overestimating your window to attack. Stacking on top of that, using items and guarding in midair. Man, that is just so helpful, I can't give it enough praise. Summons are a bit out of left field because while you get them in a relatively good pace, the problem comes in that they take up all of your magic like in KH2, but unlike 2, they need your full magic bar. Now, I get why this is. It's a big fuck you invulnerable phase that heals you, just like the Joy Forms. How about that shit, right? And it does massive damage for a short amount of time, much more so than in KH2, and the only way to increase the timer is to actively put on abilities that do so, which there aren't that many of in the game to begin with. Now, 2 things here. 1, I don't hate the idea outright, because it really makes you consider whether or not you want to heal or use an ether to get to full, and then do a big fuck you attack while also being healed, which does take longer but has a nice risk-reward factor. And 2, I get the feeling this was done to mitigate the problem of summons and links being pulled out every 5 seconds, because in 2, links were tied to your MP, and even if you only had 1 MP point left, you could do stuff like this.
Your fame shall be twofold.
Which should just not be allowed if you're looking for balance. And summons came from your drive gauge, which had so many things funneled into it, I'm surprised no one threw a beer down it. Now that you have limits as team attacks that come out randomly, which I quite like, adds to the chaos of it all. It makes sense to funnel the summons into a resource you can get back much easier, and has a built-in all-stop feature called MP Safety, so you don't ever run out of magic so you can refill it and swing that mermaid tail right in their face. It's just a smart way to do this since the focus gauge can exclusively be taken up by the shot locks, so that you don't have to give up one of your cool things if you didn't bring the the right items. All three of these games have great combat. Sure, one's a bit slow and 2 is a bit too much grinding for my taste, and 3 is just a clusterfuck. They're all still fun in their own way, and well, yes, there will be a definitive winner at the end of this, that's kind of the point. I don't think you can say one is objectively better than the others in every conceivable way. 1 excelled at basic swinging and had no gimmicks to make it less complicated, but never boring. 2 excelled at power increase that made you feel as powerful as the game wanted you to at any given moment. And 3 excelled at feeling like a fucking god at every step of the journey, but still having increasing challenges along the way, so you can't just have everything fall over with a stiff breeze. All of these struck the best balance they could with the tools they were given, and that is something to be commended for. I'm gonna spoil this out of the gate for you. KH2 isn't even a topic here. It can't be for 3 reasons, but I'll get to those in a moment. Just know this section is going to be a hands-down fight between the oldest and youngest sibling rather than the middle child. But let's face it, you all kind of expected that. So KH1 is honestly better with its levels than I gave it credit for a few years ago. Now, for those of you who don't know, I made a video for a sort of hype train to KH3 called The Legacy of Kingdom Hearts' Story, and while I mainly talked about the plot, I talked about the level design in small bits, and I said that KH1 just had random rooms that felt like the movie rather than being real representations of the movie. I stand by that in a way. The difference is that now I understand what they were limited by and can respect Wonderland a lot more, especially after Melody of Memory. I mean, hot damn, just look at this thing, it looks so cool this way. Anyway, my only real gripe with the game's level design is Wonderland because the fucking thing is a painted box and it's distracting as all hell to me. However, I kinda like it now in a weird way because that's just how Wonderland be. I think the devs made this world first as like a test run for the game, and once they got the skybox figured out, they just never went back to change it, and running all the grass and all the enemies would have just shot the PS2 in the back of the head. So again, concessions were made. Every other world is fun to look at and explore at the same time. Traverse Town is always a treat every time I get to explore it because each time you come back, you have new tools to use to open up more of it. For example, you can see a green trinity in the item shop. Once you beat Agrabah, you can now access that trinity, and that opens the Moogle shop. The only Moogle shop in the game. Thank God this is the only game in the series to have one Moogle shop. Fuck, even Chain of Memories had the option for multiple Moogles on one floor, so that even beats it out. Ugh, God, I hate material grinding in this game. The back and forth is just so dumb. Sorry, moving on. The first thing I noticed while replaying was just the different worlds on display. They almost feel like a Mario game in a way. You have a grass world, a jungle, 2 deserts, a spooky level, a ship level, a water level, an acid trip level, a Peach's castle level, a Bowser's castle level, and then you have the final boss that's in some weird time-space warp abyss thing. Okay, so there's no ice level, but it still tracks pretty well, especially like with 3D World now that I think about it. The point I'm making is that while the platforming is simple, particularly after you get Glide, the game has different feeling locations that feel more like a toy box, of the actual movies, and to me that's rather clever. You all know I hate Deep Jungle, and the reason for that is, well, I don't like Tarzan as a movie, but the level has way too many back and forths with no real shortcuts, and it gets annoying after the first 2 attempts. Although I will say that I never knew the rope jump section was a thing because I always go for the chest over by the shortcut on my initial visit, and I thought that was the only path. So I never found the section weird because I never experienced it until I was looking for chests. Conversely, I think Atlantica has the most interesting design and combat in the game because it breaks the monotony of just short hopping and spamming magic. Now you're forced to deal with these new enemies on their surf and turf, and I think that's cool. Combine that with the Captain Hook and Chernobog fights using flight, you have a solid, albeit temperamental, tutorial world for one of the penultimate boss fights. It also has one thing over the much preferred by the fandom Halloween Town, because it has a 2-way shortcut back between Ursula's lair and the throne room. Sure, it's not direct, but it's close enough that it's not going to be a slog to get back to either of those. It's at most 2 rooms away in either direction and has enough save points to matter. Halloween Town has one-way shortcut and 1 save point at the town's gate. That's fucking stupid. I know Halloween Town is small, but just make the shortcut a 2-way entrance and put a save point on the ground by the gate so that getting to the special Heartless wouldn't take 20 fucking years. I do have to give them credit here, they made Agrabah just right. Like, it's cramped in the town, but easy to navigate. The cave entrance is, well, adorable for how tiny it is, although it was supposed to be a boss arena, but the cave feels like a cave. I know that sounds easy to pull off, but listen and learn that this PS2 game, an early PS2 game at that, Trying to navigate kids through their favorite movies and then in the middle is a genuinely confusing maze that you need Aladdin to progress? That's spectacular. It's so good. It's just different from the rest of the worlds besides Beast the Wrecking Ball and Hollow Bastion. No other world requires a party member, so for this one to only need it in small bits is cool, and a pain in the ass sometimes. But in terms of level design, it's a positive. The other, 3 worlds left are fine enough. Olympus could have used like one more area to explore, maybe a few more Easter eggs, but it's fine as is. Hollow Bastion I'll talk about in a sec with KH2, and the end of the world, I'll give it this. It's a good predecessor to 0.2's Realm of Darkness. That's all I can really say on it though, it's just purple. KH2 is going to be brief and tie into the last section on drive forms. I really should just make a whole separate rant on these things one day, but anyway, the world design in KH2 is fundamentally identical to, say, Birth by Sleep. Make it look like the film and don't put anything in the way of platforming and just smatter chests everywhere. Now, where BBS was on the PSP and had to tell 3 different parts of the same story, so its limitations were hard to ignore. KH2 has a slightly different philosophy behind its simple world design. KH2 has the most worlds in the series. I will not deny that. But have you ever stopped to consider why that is? It's because the levels are barren as fuck and have nothing but heartless and chests in them rather than actual interactable things. This is due to the drive forms, again restricting your growth abilities. Because the devs can't know what any level of any given ability you have at any one time, they opted to just make the levels as flat as fucking possible. There's just nothing interesting going on here. Yes, it looks like the movie it's based on, but there's no jumping, there's no gliding from place to place, there's just nothing here. It's all interconnected rooms with flat hallways with some heartless, and maybe a landmark to tell you which part of the level you're actually in. The sole exceptions to this are the crashed boat in Pirates, the cliff face in Land of Dragons, the weird lantern room in Beast's Castle, and bits of the underworld. However, you really can't do that last one until your drive forms are leveled anyway. Now, I'm not saying KH2 has bad level design, far from it. I think Twilight Town, Radiant Garden, and the World That Never Was Castle are fun and interesting to explore because they have the most variety to them. However, they're still just flat and hallways. This is why Hollow Bastion and KH1 is more enjoyable to explore. It's the ultimate test of both your combat and puzzle solving. There are so many different things to find in this place and do and see and explore, it's just great. Every level has some kind of puzzle to solve in order to show drag queen horns and haunted boyfriend Shan who's fucking boss around here. And KH2 just doesn't do this. It simply has you walk from room to room with very little in the way of things to discover outside of chests. And for the poster boy of the franchise, I think that's unfair. Again, I get why this happened. They had 3 years to make it, had a lot of worlds to make, and the drive system leaves very little in the way of variety when you can't tell what growth ability they'll have leveled up at any given time, despite the fact you give them to the player at specific times in the story. You get my point. Let's talk about the thing you all know is coming, the Cavern of Remembrance. For those of you who don't know, the Cavern of Remembrance is a pretty hefty combat and platforming gauntlet that tests your skill and understanding of how the game operates and what it expects of you at this point, given that it's unlocked in the middle of the game and the only drive form you don't have access to at this point is Final Form, which is what unlocks the final 3 waves of challenges. And if I'm being honest, this is exactly what I wanted from the final world, a place where you can't just walk through and smack everything with your key until it dies. Here, you need to high jump or use air spin or glide to get through most, if not all, the challenges. If the game had added more challenges like this as it went along, like as in when the story gives you a new drive form, that could have led to some pretty amazing stuff, but as it stands, the rest of the game just feels like a beta test room, and that's just sad. KH3 to me has the most surprising level design in the series, not because it's fantastical to look at, although it is, but it does what I'd hope it'd do, be a blend of KH1 and 2's level design. Yes, while the worlds have a linear path to follow, especially Corona since it's a straight line, they have alcoves and secrets and not obviously placed chests and lucky emblems and just things to look for. They're not as obtuse as KH1, but they're still fun and engaging to go through each time. I also love how Olympus is your tutorial world because it has traits that other levels capitalize on. It has one big city area to explore with NPCs and things to find. It has a lush rocky mountain base to run through or up. It has a vertical section that lets you get a feel for wall running. It has a more confined area to explore the mountain itself. It has the realm of the gods as an entirely separate place, which itself has a sub area to find and explore. In fact, the only world that doesn't have a one-to-one parallel here is the Caribbean because there's no water in Olympus besides the flood. The level design is just good. I don't want to repeat myself too much from my legacy video, so again, please go check that out so you don't feel like you're getting gypped here. There was one angle I didn't really touch on there, and that was the growth abilities and how you get them. See, since you get them at specific times in the game, even on New Game Plus, the devs were actually able to make levels that have decent platforming and interesting design. Yeah, almost every wall can be run up, but that doesn't mean you can get everywhere all the time. Sometimes there is no wall, so you need double flight or another air dash to get you to a certain chest. Or just do what I do and dash attack, and you'll go the distance. Anyway, you get them so spaced apart that when you come back to a world, it makes traversing it different. The only world I would say you would need glide for is San Fran because it's just so big. But other than that, every other world is fun running through and using flow motion or super jump. Also, can we talk about super jump for a second? I still cannot get over this fucking thing. I love this stupid gut punch of an animation they gave him. It just looks so stupid and it's way funnier than it needed to be. And it just fits my boy to a T, I love it. See, whereas the combat was designed with flow motion available to you at any given time, the level design goes back to the KH1 philosophy of allowing the levels to be trickier than before, since the stuff that gets used in them is then incorporated into the level design. Do you need to use them once you have glide? Not really, but chaining your super jump into a double flight, into a glide, into an air dive is just a good time, I can't lie. Oh yeah, the air dive. While it's not technically an ability you have control over, it's more there for making falls take less time given how big the levels are. Speaking of that, there really should have been an achievement called Falling with Style, given that you can fall from the top of Galaxy Toys to the bottom, but I'm not bitter, don't mind me. The level design in the series has a wide scale and quality. One is more secrets and treasure heavy than the other two, which does lead to more frustration when you don't remember where every single chest is, especially without a guide. 2 is really good for combat given that there's nothing but your key to get snagged on, but that's at the cost of interesting or engaging level design itself for said combat. 3 has gorgeous, lush worlds that have extremely well realized environments. Yes, even this one. I didn't touch on Arendelle because again, I and everyone else have lampooned this thing to death 60 times at this point. I still give it props for making snow look pretty and having some of the funniest in-game scripted dialogue in the series.
Oh right, I love snow!
That doesn't mean it's all good, but I don't want to bore you by stating the obvious. The worlds are still well designed in all 3. 2 just suffers the most from its combat leaking into the worlds themselves a bit too much. Fucking hell, this is gonna be a hard one. The story is something everyone talks about, and while I talked about it before in different ways, I've never had to directly compare them in a way that made sense. For one, the story of KH1 is rather simple compared to everything else, and while 2 isn't much more complicated to get since the only game to be released between the 2 was Chain of Memories, it's 3 where things get murky. See, the problem with 3 is not that its story is super complicated to get, or that it doesn't have its own story. It's that it's the climax to a saga of 10 games that all had to tell their own story, whereas 2 was the end of the first third of the saga. We would get backstory stuff that I feel began with Days and ended with Birth by Sleep, and then plot forwarding stuff with Dream Drop Distance and ended with 3 with 0.2 and back cover thrown in for good measure. The story has its own 3-act structure if you look at it from release, which, come to think of it, makes things make way more sense in this structure, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at the shortest numbered game and see where it all began. Kingdom Hearts 1 is extremely straightforward with its plot. Like, I was honestly shocked with how little is left on the table by the end of the game. The only niggling plotline that the game doesn't give an express answer to is what happened to Sora, Donald, Goofy, Mickey, and Riku, and I find that rather refreshing. Now, things were added on later, like Naminé and Roxas from this one moment, and even the Council is referenced in 2. I'll cover why that's dumb in a moment, but in reality the game is working on one simple but rather scary thought. What if this bombs and we have no sequel? Which to me explains a lot of things that get retconned later in the franchise. For instance, the Keyblade having a mind of its own and how Riku could steal it near the end of the game. The prevailing argument is that since the Final Fantasy characters tell Sora that the Keyblade chose him, it didn't, and since it's the only one there is, it isn't, he's the only one to stop the conflict. However, none of them have ever seen one, and one hasn't been seen in a decade at the minimum. So let's just say their info is a bit outdated. Not to mention the fact that Riku just acquires one at the start of Chain of Memories for some reason. I don't fucking know, I don't write this shit, I just report it. Riku getting the Keyblade is kind of brought up in a Nomura video that I don't believe because he's retconning elements that don't need to be explained 20 years after the fact. Riku had a stronger heart than Sora in that moment, and Sora had an even stronger one a few moments later. That's all you need, and it works fine. That's a reoccurring thing he likes to do that I'll cover in 3 more in depth, but suffice to say that some changes work, but others while others are just dumb. The lore of KH1 is surprisingly tame for a Final Fantasy-esque title. There isn't a big explanation of why the worlds are together, or who Sora is, or why the bad guy wants to take over the world. Okay, well that last one's explained in the reports. But the rest of it's just, fuck it, this is the world they live in. It's a crossover, that's how it be. And that was something I commended the series for when I first played it, and I still do to this day. The series has never been ashamed to be its weird crossover self, and as a guy who doesn't really give a fuck about explaining how the universe came to be, or what this is, or what that place from 100 years ago is, it's nice to just get dropped in a dreamscape and have to go on an adventure. That's one thing the series has kept to, even up to and beyond 3, and it's great. Fucking golf clap. The council is even like this if you think about it. Maleficent is the head of a league of like 6 villains, and that's that. There's no need to explain it any further. The villains are well chosen given the popularity at the time. I said I'd explain why they're dumb, and trust me I will when we get to 2, but in this game they work as best they can. And I like this little detail that they're only in shadows until you go to their respective worlds. It adds to the creepiness of it all. I mean, it falls flat if you've seen any of their movies, but the point still stands. One last thing that it does well is that it has a twist that is genuinely awesome. You only really meet Ansem at the beginning once, and from that point forward, you don't hear from him until Riku's possessed. Up until then, Maleficent is meant to be the big bad, but then nope! Riku just fucking bodies her into her dragon form just so we can kill her, and it's fucking great. Legit one of the best reveals in the big 3 games. It adds so much to the end because now your boy is being controlled and your girl best friend is unconscious and it's his fault, and it's just a cool way to start the 3rd act. The game isn't perfect, it's a little bare in terms of the direction, but after a first playthrough you'll remember, it's not that bad. I think that's all I can really say about 1 in terms of the plot. It's simple, clean, straightforward, and to the point. Never thought I'd say that in a KH video, but there it is. KH2 is where things pick up. The opening is only really there to be confusing, and the amazing thing is, that's not its biggest problem. No, the problem with 2's opening is that it's boring. Roxas has gone from one of my more liked characters to just kinda middle of the road, and this opening is a big reason why. I get its point, I still don't like it though. It does get points for integrating the tutorial in a natural way since we don't know Roxas, and it makes sense he would have to learn how to look at things? You know what, forget I said anything. It does make things easier to get back into the swing of things with Sora, as the only things you are forced to learn when you get him are drive forms and magic, which in this game Roxas doesn't have aside from his Pillars of Light, so that actually lines up pretty well. KH2's story is suffering from what I like to call too little too late syndrome, where the finale has all the closure and the great music and a scene that makes me want love in my life, and the beginning has like no answers, and if anything adds more and doesn't answer half of them. Like yeah, we learned who Naminé and Roxas are if you didn't play Chain of Memories, but in actuality, it's not a big deal. Something this game drops the ball on is that the plot is just kind of happening from Sora's end. He goes off and looks for his friends, but really the organization is just not a big deal till Hollow Bastion. Now, I've praised this in the past because the organization succeeded where the council didn't. They're achieving their goals by doing absolutely fucking nothing. Maleficent is only seen by Sora 2 times, once in Agrabah near the end and when he kills her, so her presence is a little lacking. She's ironically more involved as a red herring in the front half before she fucks off after saving you in Hollow Bastion. The organization are having Sora do his thing and collecting hearts for them because it benefits them in more than one way. First, it keeps the one person they need out of their way, and 2, it fuels Kingdom Hearts for Xemnas' plan. That's why they're not cackling villains all up in his face. I mean, Zigbar's pretty up there, but the rest are just like, shouldn't we kill him? And honestly, I can get down with this because once we meet them, they're dripping with personality, and more often than not, the highlights of their worlds. The first half of the game is derided for Disney shenanigans, rather than having the plot spoon-fed to you in every single cutscene. No game in the series does this, by the way. Not even 1 or Birth by Sleep. They all have fuck-around sections before the midpoint because that's how stories work. The conflict arises in the first act and we go to try to stop it, which usually has padding in games, and then once the middle of Act 2 starts, we have the conflict more doled out, and finally in the climax everything is brought up and then we kill the bad guy. That's just how stories be. Look at one of the most beloved games of all time, Ocarina of Time. It follows the same structure. There's a point in the game where you're just doing busy work to make the game longer, and the dungeon layout is painfully linear, but it's still fun because of how the story is presented. My point is, the first visits are here so you get to know the characters and then care when the organization is fucking with them. It's called building connections. Without it, the game doesn't really have a first act and would suffer for that. I get the feeling that most people like 2's opening, but once they leave Mysterious Tower, they just want to teleport to the second visit of Radiant Garden, which is just fucking stupid because we're just thrust into some fun gameplay segments and no real context for what's going on. 2 does have an admittedly awesome climax. Basically, from the moment you unlock Twilight Town, there's just this go, go, go feeling, and it's awesome. The series does that really well across the board. There's never really been a bad climax in this series. Even Chain, Days, and Coden have awesome finales despite their lackluster stories. The Disney worlds are pretty sporadic in terms of quality. The best is probably either Space Paranoids, Halloween Town, or Agrabah, depending on my mood. The worst is by far the Pride Lands. It's bland, it's boring, it's puke green, and it's bland. I hate it. Story content-wise, they're mostly the movies with Sora and Co inserted in, but as I said in the KH3 video, all of these are movie adjacent, not straight retellings like they serve no purpose. They affect things, they grow, they change. Sora keeps having romantic Riku realizations, and it's just good and wholesome and fun. No, I will never let this joke die, get over it. Sora is just the goodest boy in this game, and he only gets better as the series goes on. He's charming, charismatic, and just the dumbest thing walking the planets. Overall, 2 is solid. It stumbles in a few areas, but its big strength is that the organization is actually organized and isn't infighting and backstabbing like the council was. It's just nice to have competent people who only go down because we beat the shit out of them, not each other. That's pretty much all I can say about 2, it's just competent for the time. Sora is cute, Riku is emo, Kairi did a thing, and the Disney characters were at least enjoyable. What more could you want from a sequel, honestly? 3 has one big issue and like 2 smaller issues that people seem to bring up constantly. Those being A, that it's backloaded as fuck, which I've already covered all these games do, and B, Arendelle and Twilight Town. Let's smack down the second of those 2 first because it's easier to talk about. First of all, I get it. Twilight Town is small. It's not what you all wanted, and while I would have killed for Mysterious Tower to be there, I can't get too mad at it since both of them are in full in at least 2 other games respectively. Twilight Town is in Chain of Memories and 2, and even Days to be honest. Then Mysterious Tower is in 2 and Birth by Sleep. Yeah, the staircase isn't there, but it's not like this place is super expansive anyway. Oh, and Dream Drop Distance, so yeah, we've been here before. So I get why Twilight Town was set to be this one area thing with people walking around and us never really having to come back here outside of Pooh's book. Which honestly, Square, you could have made that way more interesting. Like seriously, it could have been like the other games where we go get pages, but this time have like Sayax fuck with the book or something like that would have been way more fun. Or Vexen, since he's a double agent and he could use the guise of playing different minigames to gather. Well, I'll let him say it.
All this excitement has provided me with invaluable data.
Stuff like that would have made this way more worth the time, cause with New Game Plus, there is literally no reason to do Pooh's book other than getting honey for this one special menu recipe, and that's it. Arendelle has been beaten with some very large sticks by some very large people, myself included in that, so I'll be brief. We get it, Disney, you really like the money Frozen made you and you're a bunch of greedy bastards. Please fuck off from oversight on the game's story from now on, thank you. Alright, on to the more general things. The fanbase seems to have 2 modes. You're like me who likes the way the story unfolds because there's breadcrumbs to keep you going, we know the end goal so the finale is a foregone conclusion, and we're here to get stronger and protect people. Or you're mad we didn't do the thing the Keyblade is known for and it's never really brought up in the game. One thing I forgot to mention in my KH3 video was that there aren't any keyholes to seal in this game. We just help people and leave. Almost every game, most notably 1, 2, and DDD, focus on you finding and sealing keyholes, be it a literal keyhole in the world or an item of significance in that world that acts as its keyhole, be it the Rose that Cursed the Beast or the membership card you were given like 30 seconds ago. I would have made it the castle, but hey, that's just me.
Not exactly what I had in mind, but not bad.
As a result of this tangible goal, people said most of the worlds don't have a point here, and I said that's not a bad thing because we're here to help the best princess ever, made a smattering of best friends, and re-meet some old ones. I think the tone is set in Olympus because we can't seal the keyhole for the 3rd time. That'd just be silly.
Mustard, yes, but mustard? Don't let's be silly. Lemon, that's different.
So we don't really think about it. However, we've never been to the rest of these worlds besides the Caribbean or Pooh's book, so sealing the keyhole would have made it click to people that we did something, anything other than help people. I personally like that it's just Sora and Co being themselves and not having to worry about the fate of the world more so than, oh, fuck, the Heartless are here, and get the people who need their help from point A to point B. It's just fun. The game, to me, falls in line with something like The Lion King, at least from a story structure perspective. Trust me, this will make sense in a second. So The Lion King has a very long first act, like 45 minutes of a 90-minute movie. So the midpoint where he meets up with Nala happens like 15 minutes later at the 1 hour mark. The 3rd act starts like 10 minutes after that. If the clock climax of that movie felt short to you as a kid, now you know why. Kingdom Hearts 3 operates in very much the same way. The first act is all the Disney worlds, the second act is saving Aqua, Ven, and reporting back to Yen Sid, and Act 3 is the Keyleth Graveyard and all that happens within it. One thing I do hate about this game's climax is that it retcons Xehanort's motives. He goes from being a wacky scientist in the vein of, I want to see what will happen, to a misunderstood bad guy trying to fix the world by resetting it because the balance of light and darkness is thrown off. I hate this because the first thing was vastly more interesting, and now it's just some generic, I want to fix everything even though we're all fine the way we are stories. And this is one of those retcons I talked about because Nomura just can't help himself. Anyway, back to your regularly scheduled ramblings. This game is the climax of the Darkseeker saga that had to have its own 3-act structure to appease fans that have been waiting for the last 19 years. Is it perfect? No. Is it as satisfying as 1 and 2's ending? Yes, absolutely, but in different ways. One's ending surpasses in feeling like an epic quest has ended with 2 great friendships being formed and saved. It's wholesome. Yes, the conflict is more world-ending than in 2, given the fact the climax takes place in a location called the End of the World, but it matches with Birth by Sleep in 3 when it comes to the stakes of the universe being destroyed. 2's ending feels the most complete. Like if the series had ended here with these 3 games, then no one would have batted an eye and been happy. 3's ending succeeded in that it was spectacular. It was more about giving closure and making things right by the fans, besides Kairi, but all 3 games dropped the ball on that. It's not as conclusive as 2's because it's not trying to be. It was left open for the DLC and future games. See, Base 3 was the end of the Darkseeker saga, but Remind, its DLC, was the start of the next saga. Yeah, tell me that's not confusing as fuck with a straight face. The whole point of 3 is to kill Xehanort, and the whole point of Remind is to find Kairi. Then the Limit Cut, Secret Episode, and Melody of Memory are trying to find Sora. The base game has a complete story. It also just ends on a cliffhanger, which yes, can be unsatisfying, but it's been 2 years and we have more closure thanks to those aforementioned add-ons. It's a good story. All of these are. I just feel like 3 gets unfairly maligned because it wasn't the second coming of big gay gaming Jesus, and forgetting that it wasn't trying to be that. It was just trying to be itself, and I love it for that. The story of these games are all different levels of good. 1 gets it right in terms of the impending doom, 2 has a good balance of fun playtime and dangerous stakes, at least when they pop up, and 3 has a blend of these two because you're constantly reminded of the danger, but you're allowed to have fun at the same time. There's a different level of enjoyment each game gives me. 1 makes me smile at the budding friendship between Sora, Donald, and Goofy, as well as starting one of the most wholesome bromances in gaming. 2 makes me smile at how pure Sora is, and just how everyone is settled into their roles, as well as everything just being sweet and saccharine. It's a magical experience. 3 just makes me laugh at how everyone is like breaking the fourth wall constantly, and how they seem to just know how ridiculous this all is. It's fun. They're all fun, and that's all that matters. Enemies are something the series has always been good at, be it from a design perspective or an actual interesting mechanic. In most RPGs, all enemies can be hit with either magic or physical combos and they'll die every time. However, even when we look at the first game, some enemies are impervious to certain types of magic, and even the Green Raccoon will heal after any magic whatsoever. That's actually kind of smart since most people will just spam thunder to clear rooms, but with them you can't, and you want to take them out first since they'll heal other enemies. It's a nice way to make the player think on what they're doing. I'm kind of foregoing the format in this section, since enemies are just something to grind at or halt the story, which in an action RPG makes complete sense. They're there so that you aren't just walking from room to room with no encounters and having long stretches of cutscenes with nothing happening. So I'm mostly going to be talking about each game's most interesting or frustrating enemies just for the sake of expedience. So KH1 has the most varied looking enemies. Like, when I see them, I can tell they're all from different worlds, because typically you'll encounter those weird looking bats in other places, but really they're only in the stadium and Halloween Town. Ditto with those weird spinny scarecrow looking motherfuckers. That's something that 2 stumbles at, and 3 kinda sticks the landing on, but less so for obvious reasons. My favorite enemies are definitely from late game, like those weird shield guys with the Cerberus face on the shield. I don't know why, but I always thought that those were the faces of these guys, and the guys on the back were the brains. They're essentially late game fat bodies since you have to walk around them to hit them, so yeah, they aren't mechanically satisfying. I don't know, just something about their design and the weirdness of it all hits me. I can't explain it. Would have been really cool to have these guys in any game past Chain of Memories or Melody of Memory now that I think about it. Like, having these guys in Remind would have made all the difference because they're such a different design philosophy than anything else. Another one I like is those weird knights, like the ones right above the generic Shadow Heartless, and that's because they look like Ansem just spat them into a suit and it's just a bit too heavy for them, so they just kind of fumble around and it's cute. Plus, they have this weird spin attack that makes me giggle, and they aren't used much. Like, yeah, they're in a lot of worlds, but they fall out of favor really quick for like the monkeys and fat bodies in different outfits, and overall just less interesting things. KH2 has an interesting problem. See, while a lot of enemies work in their respective worlds, and that's kind of the point, they don't really work in any others. The ones that stick out the most to me in this regard are the Hot Rods in Crimson Jazz because they're used every fucking where, most notably in Beast's Castle every 5 feet and the Underworld Coliseum. I'm not saying reusing enemies in different worlds is bad, again, especially with the Coliseum, but when I think of KH2 enemies, there's really only like 1 or 2 per world that feel unique to them in a thematic way, like the Centaurs from Land of Dragons, or everything from Pride Lands, I guess. The sword guys from Agrabah are just the same bandits from KH1 with an extra sword, and that's fine. Just evolving a concept is fine, but still. The statues in Beast's Castle are an interesting surprise the first time, I'll give it that. They're probably one of my favorites in the game because they just jump out from being painted in the background to being real, and that's something that no other enemy in the series does. They all just appear out of nowhere. However, I can't shake the feeling that something is off with the enemies in this game. Like the ghosts that show up a lot. I get why they're in the underworld, but why are they in Port Royale or Agrabah or the Cavern? Like, what's the point? I like the aerial knockers, those are creative. And the name sounds dirty out of context, which is always fun. Kind of like saying the word peacock. Doesn't come up very often, and it has the word cock in it. Those little airplanes that only show up in Timeless River are adorable, and we stand a cute enemy in this household, damn it. Funny enough, the more nobodies we see as the game goes on, the worlds get more interesting, because they all represent the organization member they are commanded by. Land of Dragons gets the snipers, Port Royale gets the gamblers, Beast's Castle gets the lance guys, Radiant Garden gets the dancers for, I guess, Demics? And Twilight Town and the World That Never Was gets a mix of all of them. I suppose that was the point. The first half of the world would feel a bit samey, given that we've seen the base 3 to 5 Heartless in the first 2 games, but still it's a nice change. That's something that 2 definitely has over 1, which is that the introduction of nobodies allowed them to expand into wider colors and designs that the blackness of the Heartless didn't really grant in most cases outside of clothes. Nobodies are all clothes, so as long as they're mostly white, you can tint them into different shades or have more accent colors that lead to more dynamic designs. If we look to 3, we can see this in the Marluxia and Larxene nobodies. Marluxias are weird and wacky, and I feel like they're about to topple over.
I like my women like I like my dreidels. Bottom heavy?
I cannot explain why, but the way they move just adds a bit of fun to them. Larxenes are more shaped like a star almost, but also give off a ninja-like quality, which granted makes sense, they do look very zoom, and she is the queen of kicking my face in under 2 seconds, so that adds up. I like this weird thing that both of them have invulnerability phases that allow them to counterattack you if you keep spamming X at them. Not all enemies have that in the series, and it's a nice change of pace. One weird thing I'll throw shade at 3 for is the utter lack of Darklings. Now, I don't play Union Cross at all. Like, yeah, I dabbled in it a little bit in 2018 to get the Starlight Code, but other than that, I have no loyalty to that game. But look at these cute little bastards, how could you not love them? They're only used in Olympus, Twilight Town, and Corona, and damn it all, they're cute! How amazing would a toy version of these things be for like Toy Box or something? Like, they just aren't used enough and it's weird. Also, the Bull Heartless. They're used more often in bigger areas, but the game has you meet them in Olympus, and then they're just absent for the rest of the game until San Fran and then Remind. And I find it odd they're not in Toy Box because they have wind-up springs on their back. Like, why are they not there? In Toy Box, they would have fit perfectly since you modeled them differently for Olympus, and then every other world they appear in. Like, what the fuck, guys? The enemies I feel they looked at and went, you know what this needs? More battle time, are the water and flame cores. Especially in Olympus because the flame cores are only weak to water, which costs a lot of MP and have a coded DM that will one-shot you on crit like nothing else. And the water cores have that water shield that let them teleport away for no reason. There really aren't any enemies that I hate in 3. Like, there's no hot rods that have that stupid move that can juggle you. The flame cores are the closest thing, and even then that's only for one scripted fight. Favorite Heartless is definitely the deer from Arendelle. Ever since the Frozen trailer, I have been in love with this thing and I can't get over it, it's so cute! I want a plushie of it so bad, accordion legs and all. Best nobody is definitely Marluxia's because of how they move and how they just burn like the weeds that they are. Enemies in the series are well designed, well thought out, and typically have something that makes them stick with us for one reason or another. Be it a design option, a clothing option, or just how they move, or completely destroy you out of nowhere. I'm not bitter, Square. The downside is, with so many worlds and IPs to work with, enemy design and placement can fall by the wayside in some cases, and I can understand that. But in terms of what makes a good enemy, it's the looks and the workarounds we love the most. And honestly, all 3 games do this extremely well. Disney has an interesting representation between the 3 games. In 1, it was a healthy blend of platforming and incorporating the Final Fantasy aspect of things. In 2, the drive form shot any idea of interesting level design in the foot. And 3 has the best visual representation while keeping some of the more linear paths of the past games. Each has different strengths to work with and is harder to pull off without straight up using mechanics from past games. What kills me is that as time has gone on, I found that no game really has a clear winner on this aspect because they're not trying to outdo each other. They're just trying to work with the tools they have. Here, let me explain. In each game, Olympus is a case study in what you can do with trying to evolve a concept. So in KH1, it's just the entrance of the stadium where you sign up for the games. Nothing too spectacular. But the world has like 8 things to interact with, and for a 2-room world, that's pretty impressive. I think of Dusty Gold when I think of this place, and it feels kinda comfy in a way. KH2 has the same 3-room setup, but then you get the whole of the underworld, which I think most people wanted to explore. And while I would have killed for it to be a more platforming-centric place, there's always an option for that later on. When I think of this place, it feels like death. It feels cramped and vast and small and long and just green. I know that makes no sense, but that's kind of the point of hell. But it gets the job done. I feel very depressed when we come here because of all the spikes and oddly shaped skulls in the background. Hey Coco, I think you owe Hercules some royalty checks. 3 broke off in the pack and didn't feature the Colosseum at all, and expanded the Thebes from Birth by Sleep and gave us the actual mountain and the realm of the gods. Here I think of sunshine and gold, and I get the smell of Greek food. It just feels cozy given that people actually live here, and it's not a place to just kill monsters. Again, none of these places outshine one another on the scale of quality, seeing as they all feel like Disney. How they go about it is the big difference. This does go with the level design section, so the winning here might seem obvious, but there are things to consider beyond the physical layout. This can also tie into scale in a way, but you'll see why in a moment. So a few years ago, I said that KH1 was the facsimile of the Disney worlds that just looked like mashup sections of rooms that didn't make sense, and KH2 felt more like the actual movie, given that I had just got into the series and bought into the whole KH2 is the best thing ever mentality the community had kind of fostered since they were children, and everything else had come out on handhelds afterward. Now I've reversed this opinion. While KH1 has smaller levels than 2, the amount of content in each level is something that still blows my mind to this day. You've got chests, secrets, branching paths, and just this sense of giving a fuck about how the player interacts with the level and these characters. Sure, by today's standards it looks dated, but at least they're better than having nothing to work with at all. Wonderland, while I hate the Trickmaster and how boxy it looks, at least makes sense that it's this confusing. Traverse Town has different magic-shaped keyholes that make getting to the 1st and 3rd district easier. Atlantica has the 2-way shortcut that makes getting from the throne room to Ursula take less time. Just small things like that add up to make these places feel more lived in. Monstro is kinda weird, and the pirate ship is needlessly segmented, but I chalk that up to them needing to make a level out of a boat rather than trying to be realistic. The game gets this sense of feeling like the worlds are tailor-made for your adventure rather than being super accurate and putting nothing in there to come back to. Speaking of that, KH2 is just that. Every world is some variation of flat surface with enemies spawning in. There's very few areas I would call interesting in KH2. The mountain pass for the fact it has platforming at all, the room where you fight the lock monster, and I guess the town square in Agrabah, but really that's it. The rest are just boring. Yeah, you feel the movie's location more, but at the same time, who gives a shit how high or tall it all is, or how many models you can put on screen when I can just run in a given direction, not kill anything, and exit the room without jumping? I just feel like that's lazy. I get why the levels are the way they are, and I will commend them on the detail they put into the levels look this much like the movies, but they only had like a year to make this since Chain of Memories came out in like 2003, but my point is that the game suffered in the level design aspect from the fact they spent too much time on the drive forms and thus crippled the way the levels function. I know I went over this earlier, but it bears repeating given how these bleed into each other. I mean, yes, the game looks more like the movies, but it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't have the same charm KH1 does when it comes to its iconography. Hell, even the world that never was is just boring in its design. And this is the same world mind that is the final boss dungeon. You'd think they'd use at least the base 4 drive forms to their fullest, as they were the only ones in the OG release. So barring glide, why not give us some platforming or need for high jump? Because aside from these little crowns, which are fun, it's not needed. KH3? Well, KH3 slaps when it comes to the Disney worlds, as it was the main focus and where most of the teams that approved the game had their eyes set. Every world has this sense of mixing KH1 and 2's best aspects and disregarding the bad. For instance, the multiple paths are here to some extent. However, getting lost in some place like Arendelle is still common given how everything looks the same. One little bit I liked was that in Corona there are signs that point you to the kingdom. So if during combat or looking for chests you get turned around, you can see that and correct yourself. Same thing with Flynn telling you you're going the wrong way during the story.
Hey, kingdom's the other way, guys.
Small things like that would be really cool to be implemented in other games. I feel like it leans more on 2 and Dream Drop Distance, more so DDD than 2, but still, in that the levels are big and open, but with little in the way of interactable things to do. I still say this one nailed the look, feel, and understanding of the films better than the other two, but at the same time, its parts are greater than the sum of its whole. Like, I'm by no means disappointed by any of these worlds, I just think that something like Deep Jungle, for all of its faults, has more going on than Toy Box given the philosophy behind the game's level design. Gotta say, 0.2 kills the look and feel of the Realm of Darkness. If the rest of the game had this much interaction and wacky shit, it'd be perfect. Something I need to bring up, and undoubtedly will when I do my DDD and BBS comparisons, is that KH1 and 2 were designed by the Tokyo team that either moved on to other projects or disbanded, I don't care to Google it, and the Osaka team has developed every game from Birth by Sleep onward. So it makes sense that the level design would get better as time went on. In Birth by Sleep, the levels were very similar to KH2 to accommodate the PSP's capabilities, but that's really it. In Dream Drop Distance, since it was on the 3DS, they could play around with some stuff more, and that led to combining elements into 3 since each game looks like a Disney movie. But now they have the raw power to back it up and really sell it. They have a rep for being floaty, but I've squashed that to death, so fuck it, I don't care to bore you again with it. Suffice to say, the Osaka team has gotten better with time. It makes things hard to talk about since people bash them for honestly getting their footing on some handhelds with a madman at the helm. Long story short, Disney worlds have a bell curve in how the games go about it, and while I hate some worlds like Pride Lands, Deep Jungle, and Arendelle, they still look great, and at least the Pride Lands are optional. Seriously, fuck this barren wasteland of nothingness. If you're curious about my favorite worlds in each game, they are Atlantica, the world that never was for its architecture, and Corona. But that's really all I have to say on the subject. Let's move on to the big guys, shall we? Alright, this is the section you all wanted to see, the one that undoubtedly KH2 has the edge in, boss fights. Well, at least the humanoid ones, that is. The big monster fights are still pretty bare bones. Besides the Shadowstalker and Darkthorn, those two take some understanding to deal with, and I love it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What makes the bosses in this series so memorable? Well, for one, KH1 and 2 have a lot, and I do mean a lot, of the bosses with the actual villains of their particular world. 1 does this in every world, 2 does this with most of them, and 3 only has 1, which sucks, but I'll re-explain my point on why that is when we get there. Also, yes, we'll go over the super bosses at the end of this section. I just want to talk about the base game bosses first, since those are designed around the tools you have at any given moment, rather than assuming you have the whole arsenal. KH1 probably has the most middle-of-the-road bosses in terms of how you actually deal with them. It's no stretch to say that KH1 is mash X and sometimes cure, and that can get you through 90% of all encounters, which is to be expected of the first game of this caliber. It's not exactly a surprise in my mind, but the game forces you to understand when to dodge, when to guard, and when you can use magic or have to jump out of the way. Jafar really highlights this design for me since there are 2 targets to contend with, and he casts different spells that make you pay attention in order to get the hell out of the way. If you dodge them, he's open to some fire spells, and if you get hit, he flies away. And Genie, well, he's just kind of there, honestly. I've never gotten hit by him. It's a waste of a second wish if I'm being honest. I still find years later that Ursula is the best fight in the game since the fight gives you the tools you need to beat her. And she's what led to Kurt Ziza and the Phantom. Atlantica isn't the most flawless world, but man, it's a gem you all spit on for water combat, and I do not understand why. The Ursula fight has 2 things going for it. 1, it has the pot that reacts to your not of that world magic and explodes, knocking her and her poopsies out. And 2, those same poopsies that when you hit them fill like 1/3 of your magic regen bar to repeat the cauldron so that you can get free damage on her. It's just a smartly designed encounter and something that Captain Hope would capitalize on since you get flight in this fight, so it's a teaching moment. There are some wonky bosses like Clayton and the Stealth Sneak, and some of the bosses in the Coliseum are stubborn, but that's to be expected. Again, this was the first of its kind, so I can understand early game bosses being whack rather than all of them being polished. In fact, the big monster fights hit so well in this game because they all do things other than just shaking you off. Well, besides one. Poor guy, you truly are the weakest link in this game. KH2 just straight up kills it when it comes to these bosses. Every boss has some kind of cool reaction command that lets you deal with them in a specific way. Yeah, sure, they're glorified QuickTime events, but there's just something rather cathartic about smacking a bitch with a giant chandelier, or completely bodying a Chinese parade float, or using Luxord's time cards to deplete his gauge. Fun fact, learn that one on a whim, it's a big help. The most interesting boss in the game for me is Barbossa, since he has the same rules applied to him as the rest of the pirates, as well as Jack. And I don't think any other boss in the game has that level of attention paid to them. My favorite boss is Hades in the second visit to Olympus, because you can't cheese him, but he's still fair enough to be an interesting encounter. Again, the reaction commands are kind of the win button in most fights, because they activate cutscenes that just required timing to get. The only one that took advantage of this in any real way was Phase 1 Xemnas, because he has 3 that appear in rapid succession, and if you hit the third one, he's paralyzed and you get some free damage. That's smart and something that other bosses don't do. The only ones that come close to this are the 13th mushroom in the world that never was and Luxord with his roulette game. What makes this game's bosses a cut above the rest is that even without the reaction commands, they have smart AI that makes you pay attention rather than just whacking away at them like in 1. Not to mention most of them have hard-coded phase transitions that pause the fight and make you go on the defensive. Like, I can't think of a single fight where you can just wail on them and not hit a revenge value of some kind. Oh yeah, KH2 introduced a thing called revenge values that basically means that you can hit a boss until a certain point where they would either attack or jump back, usually the former, but still. In most cases, 2 finishes would be what it would take for a boss to stop being staggered by your attacks and retaliate. Some broke away from this trend, but typically that was the case. It makes the fights almost feel like you're trading combos in some cases, but that's not really a bad thing, especially in later fights when it makes it easier to read them rather than if they didn't have this. KH3 on the other hand has the revenge value system, but the tells or actual revenge they dish out tend to be less frequent. Instead, almost all bosses will jump up or away to give the player time to breathe. I like this a lot better because it makes problematic fights like Angelic Amber less of a hassle, but also removes a problem that super bosses would have before in that they would just flat out crunch you to 1 HP in a hot second. It leads to a lot more satisfying encounters than the later fights in 2 because overall the fights bite back, but they don't hit like a truck in every encounter. One thing this game was criticized for was the number of giant monster fights, and to an extent I can understand that. I mean, I've bitched enough about the Grim Guardianess to fill several small books. Firstly, the game's engine accommodates them much more, and secondly, it's a balance in the game's narrative. For instance, there are around 8 to 12 giant monster fights, depending on how you count it, but I consider Marshmallow more humanoid since he's like 2 feet taller than Sora, and Sora is only like 5'7". I love this short kid. And then there are like 15 to 20 humanoid fights in the game. Yes, they're all endgame, but if every single fight here was a human-sized fight, then it would get boring. There are very few heartless nobody or unversed that tower over you. Yes, each group has 1 or 2 that can do that, but in reality, most of them are on your level. And the worlds are much bigger in this game than in the past, and to keep the level scaling a thing, they had to pepper the levels with not only random enemies, but also scripted ones for the story beats. The fights themselves are giant monsters, so the moment-to-moment gameplay isn't the same all the way through. The only reason San Fran and the Caribbean are human-shaped is because those worlds are mainly mini-games from the story standpoint, so you can make a beeline to the end if you really want. There really isn't exploration to be had in the story, so the bosses were shaking up the formula and setting the pace for the rest of the game's climax. The organization fights are really spectacular. I mean, look at all that's happening here. Look at all the flair put into them. I said that these fights kick ass because we fought all of them at least once before, and thus doing it again would be redundant, especially with competent AI this go around, and it makes less sense from a story perspective. The only one that doesn't make narrative sense is Mickey with Marluxia, Luxord, and Larxene because those 4 have never really interacted. But Riku and Xigbar versus Riku, Axel and Kairi versus Syx and Gion, or Ven and Aqua versus Terranort and Vanitas are all ends to their respective character arcs. Be they Riku Replica, Aqua, Ven, Terra, Gion, Axel, or Syx, it doesn't matter. They all get their ends in these fights and it's just great. It's what we wanted, right? I'd like to think so. Plus, it'd make Remind kinda pointless if these were one-on-one. Since we get to fight them in a group, we're kinda used to how they work, but not exactly in every way since there's more shit going on. I'll swing back to this in a moment, but I find the data fights in 3 easier because of this setup. So, super bosses in the series are complicated. In 1, they were pretty sporadic. You have Kurt Ziza, which is a weird sword-wielding snake thing, the Ice Titan, which is a game of icicle ping-pong, the Phantom, who's a cheap little bitch that needs to sit still, Xemnas from KH2, who was not designed around this game's combat guys, and then there's old Sephi, who, I'll be honest, is a good balance of slow and quick attacks that aren't completely bullshit to understand. But it's Kingdom Hearts 1, nothing's that complicated to get besides the puzzles. Sephiroth is the ultimate test of that game's capabilities and understanding explaining what makes KH1 a good game. KH2 is where the super boss standard comes from, and mostly I get that. Some of them suck, most of them slap. If I had to explain it, it'd be a gimmick problem. Ones that are straight up sword fights are really interesting to me because those are surprisingly rare in this series. If I had to separate the ones I hate to the ones I like, it'd probably be like this. In the bad, we have Luxord for his DM, Marluxia for his stupid counter and that he keeps spawning in those pools, Zoldan for how narrow this bridge is, Demyx for his last dance water dance, but otherwise love his fight, it's got a good rhythm to it. My only real problem with Xigbar and Vexen is that they both have something that does ridiculous amounts of damage for no reason and it's fucking annoying, but it's still manageable. And I think that's it for the data fights I hate. The other 5 are really great. Yeah, Lexaeus is weird with his stupid power levels, but it's not like he's super hard. You just have to learn his grab animation from his scrape animation, something I am terrible at. Seriously though, Lexaeus, Larxene, Xemnas, Syax, Roxas, and even Zexion, despite how long he takes, are all really engaging and fun given they actually attack you and make you fucking try as opposed to something else that does the work for them. If I had to pick my favorite and least favorite data fights, they would be Roxas and Phase 1 Xemnas. I cannot explain why, he just fucks with me so much. For KH3, I can safely say that with the right gear, all of these fights are really great. My favorites are actually a tie between Vanitas, Young Xehanort, and Riku because they're all just sword fights. No scripted bullshit, no berserk modes, no scripted DMs, no cheese needed. It's just you and another Keyblade wielder duking it out to be king of the datascape, and I love it. My least favorites? Well, my least favorite is still Marluxia for his DM that just kills you if you don't cheese the counter. Seriously, fuck that fight. I honestly have nothing else to say about these fights. They're intuitive, and if you survive the DM, you can typically pull through. So the data fights are cleared. There are still 4 other fights to talk about though. Well, really 2 since I covered Lingering Will and Yuzora a while back, but I'll give them a once-over for those of you who haven't seen it. Fuck Terra. He needs a workaround that isn't just waiting until he's done to thunder him so you can get your requisite 2 combos on him and then fuck off. Yuzora is a competently made super boss that can be cheesed and tackled normally and isn't a fucking headache every time I see him. He's got a wide range of moves and abilities and just stuff to work with that makes him fun to learn, and he takes real damage. Terra does not. And in my super bosses, I like the ability to fuck up here and there and still be able to pull through. The last 2 are KH2 Sephiroth and Dark Inferno. These 2 are base game super bosses that are a nice middle ground in terms of challenge between the data fights and the game's requisite King O damage. Sephiroth's benefit is that he only has a 1 clear per game quota, so players come in getting their dick slammed in because they expect him to be like the data fights or Lingering Will, when in reality, he has a move he opens with that instantly kills you if you don't dodge it or hit triangle. This is the reaction command version of his Sin Harvest attack, that one's for me, that kills you if you don't interrupt it. And you'd think I'd hate that, but I don't, because in both cases, the spell takes so long that you can react and get to him or set up an elixir to save your ass. It's a nice balance. Dark Inferno is much easier, but I kinda like that. He's harder than Xehanort in the base game, but with Dark Inferno, I can loop him for the first 2 phases with fire spam and then comboing him into a corner. I don't know why, that's just fun to me. You'll notice that the fights that are the hardest are not my go-to. I like fights that allow me to have a good time and kind of mess up while also being able to win. I don't like having to memorize the fight to get through it. It's like a boss in a turn-based game who has his DM he can one-shot you with in the first turn, and it's annoying. That's what I hate in a boss. It's my biggest problem with Final Fantasy VII's remake in its hard mode. Too many things that aren't hard on normal can now just crunch you to 0 HP in one attack. That's not a fun time. Bosses across the series are somewhat interesting. Most are mechanically satisfying and are understandable to work with. Some aren't, but those are bad bosses that broke from good design since they were typically added after the fact. I like what we have, and I hope they keep improving as they have been so far. And as contradictory as this might sound, I really like the random quality shifts. It makes each game a surprise when we go from easy to hard to confusing to just plain crazy. That's good design that keeps players on their toes. Some like 1, most prefer 2, and a lot think Remind fixed 3. It didn't. Me? I just like a good teeth smacking. Music is going to be rather short, seeing as I want to mainly focus on the vocal tracks and Dearly Beloved, more so than the field and battle themes because we all know the world themes are good. I'll give my thoughts on my favorite and least favorite from each game though, just to be fair. Oh, also boss themes if I feel they stand out in a big way, which every game has at least one of those, so that tracks. The music is, I feel, important to bring up because it colors your perception more than you realize, and it's also just nice to bring up since it's a component of each game that makes it stand out more than just hearing 3 sets of footprints and wind blowing in the breeze. So, for the last time today, let's look at the eldest brother first. Kingdom Hearts 1 has rather simple music, and I find that pleasant given how little budget the first game had. The music being this amazing is just a marvel to behold. Simple and Clean, from its inception, is meant to trick you with its beat and make you come back to its lyrics later and really digest them. This is why slower versions of the song and even covers don't quite hit the same. The ebb and flow of the song is there so that you get the point of its meaning. That being, just because everything sounds fine doesn't mean that it is. This is compounded later by Face My Fears, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, I want to look at those field themes. Ironically, my favorite and least favorite come from the same place, that being Atlantica. This will again come up when I talk about 3, but the field theme in this is just the same loop of Under the Sea, and oh my god, it's fucking annoying. The battle theme though is just bouncy, energetic, and fun to listen to the point that I wish it were the field theme and they had made something else, but given how often combat happens in Atlantica, I'm not too bothered by it. Favorite boss theme is the one for Riku Ansem. Why? Because it kicks so much ass. It's a nice blend of Hollow Bastion and what I'm guessing would be the lead up to Castle Oblivion's theme, and something that would influence most music for significant boss fights to come. This is probably why tracks like Lord of the Castle are so popular, because it took inspiration from Riku Ansem's theme. And to be frank, I kinda wish the final boss had Riku helping you fight Ansem. That would have kinda made everything come full circle, at least in a musical sense. Look at me, sounding like Sideways up in this bitch. Kingdom Hearts 2... I'm just gonna have to bite the bullet here. I fucking hate Sanctuary. Like, unironically hate it. The chorus is fine, but the melody goes on for so long and it's so loose in what it's going on about. All I can tell you is that the two people from Simple and Clean are now more codependent than before, and... nope, that's really it. I cannot tell you what this song is trying to convey. I will say out of the 4 tracks, those being Simple and Clean, this, Face My Fears, and Don't Think Twice, this has the most visually coherent idea, but that's because it only had to tell the major beats of KH1 and Chain of Memories, then could get weird with its visuals. I'll touch on this later, but Face My Fears still wins hands down as my favorite video and song, but I will give Sanctuary its dues for looking fantastic. Also, it's 4.5 minutes long. Why? Moving on to the game's actual music, we all know the winner here, The Other Promise. Like, it's not even a question, this is one of the single best themes in the franchise. It's only heightened by the fact Roxas has his own theme, which is just a lesser version of this track. It's brilliant, and showcases that there is indeed a brain rattling around that thing Nomura calls a skull. Field and battle themes are harder to pinpoint in this case because, while none of them are truly awful, none of them are particularly noteworthy either. I get the sense most of the musical brainpower was put into the boss and scripted encounters, rather than the worlds themselves, something I think both 1 and 3 did better. I don't know, just something about the world themes just doesn't hit as much. Like, I can remember them, but not to the same degree as Monster's theme, or Atlantica's battle theme, or even Arendelle from 3. If I had to say what my favorite is from 2, it's Isn't It Lovely from Atlantica. It's just so nice with the harps and all the serene beauty to it that doesn't really come up in the rest of the game. That, and what a surprise, because this thing has such a consistent beat and is so fun to hum along to. And it's the only song on Melody and Memory I can full chain without trying on any difficulty. In fact... Alright, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, field tracks. Easily the worst comes from the Pride Lands, because they're just so generic and feel stale that I can't be arsed to give a shit. I know it seems like I shit on 2 a lot, and I have my reasons, but I want to get across the point that just because this game is amazing, its whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I love 2, it's my second favorite game in the franchise, but that doesn't mean it's getting by unscathed when I bring up flaws in regards to what came before or after. I'm a 3 fan, and I'll explain my points best I can, but it's not like 2 was rolling a perfect 10 in any department aside from the combat, and even then it has issues. I'll get to that in the end results, but for now, let's, for the last time, look at the baby of the franchise. Ah, God, why does the song slap so hard? Seriously, Face My Fears reigns supreme between the 4 songs. If we throw in the Ray of Hope mix of Simple and Clean, we might have a debate there, but in terms of base Simple and Clean, Sanctuary, Face My Fears, and Don't Think Twice, Face My Fears wins 100% of the time. It's something I can't quite explain, but the way the song flows and builds and slows and breaks before ramping up for the finale is just wonderful. I don't normally like dubstep as a genre, but it's incredibly well done here. I haven't heard something like this in a while, and it's rather refreshing to have a piece that isn't so in your face about everything. Don't Think Twice is a bit slower than I would have liked, but that's what remixes are for, and it's a really fitting song for the end of the saga now that I think about it. In the big KH3 video, I said these 4 songs tell a story about a relationship, and I stand by that. Listening to them in the order of release shows you the evolution of a relationship from its conception to its next logical point, which is marriage. Not for everyone, but obviously these two. It's a rather beautiful story, and the fact that I find Sanctuary to be the most boring song is fitting because it's when they're most comfortable with each other. That's the point. In a relationship, when things get comfortable, to others it can look boring, and that's fine as long as you're happy. For game-specific tracks, I don't really have a least favorite. If I had to say, it'd probably be the Ice Labyrinth or Monstropolis. And while yes, I said they were fitting before, it doesn't mean that I have to love them. Favorite tracks are the Arendelle Field theme, Ice Slider theme, and the Toy Box Battle theme, because they're all bouncy and fun and so joyful I can't help myself. My only problem with the music is that I wish there was more tracks that took advantage of the space they're in, rather than being remakes of already existing songs. Looking at you, Realm of Gods and Toy Box. It's not a perfect set of tracks, but it's certainly the amount of tracks I like to listen to overall. The boss themes are just remixes, so it loses points in most cases to me, but they still hit good, so this one's kinda tough. The music in the series is a mixed bag of things. A lot of tracks hit really hard, and a lot of them fall in the meh category. The tracks that I would classify as bad are extremely few, to the point that I can't really name any off the top of my head that I haven't already mentioned. My problem with the music is that very few tracks seem to get a lot of love, unless it's or something on that level of fandom love. A lot of the tracks fall by the wayside, and I hate it. Music colors your perception on the levels you play, and a lot of time players simply don't think about what they consume, or are like me, and after playing the same game 5 times, you just mute the damn thing so you can listen to other stuff in the background, so you can stop going insane from this endless loop of this shitty Randy Newman song. I honestly can't find anything else to say other than that. The tracks are just good. Overall, the music works, even if it's not always the most memorable. You know, I was sitting here trying to think of a fair way to end things. I mean, I have the numbers and can mathematically show you which game is the best to me, which I will do in a second, but I don't think that's enough. I want to end things on saying that I really enjoyed all of these games. I loved talking about them, and had fun trying to articulate the flaws and strengths of each game, rather than having to explain why one's good on its own and smacking down the others to get people to shake their biases. I know I shit on 2 a lot, and most people I think can agree with that, but I still love playing it. I love the dumb story, the dumb boys, the way people kiss the game's dick. I love all of it. It's a great moment-to-moment experience, but the overall experience always leaves me feeling backloaded. Now where have I heard that before? One gets a lot of shit for its slower combat and really close camera, and those are issues the game really should have had patched out in the remasters, but it's one of those things that kinda lends to the game's charm in a way. The combat absolutely pales in comparison to the others, but the sense of scale and progression will always reign supreme. I've definitely been softer on 3, and that's because it's the baby of the franchise people like to pick on, but I will say that it has problems in the fact that enemies have weird tails, crit is too hard, and all of the difficulties are too easy, and just that there are little niggling problems that other people bitch about that I personally don't care about, since the overall experience was fun and the moment-to-moment stuff was great. I'm not saying these games aren't flawed, they are, but my favorite is just something that made me feel like I was a kid again, even though I didn't play these games as a child. And since YouTube likes numbers, here's your numbers. For each game, there are 7 categories, ranked 1 to 10, so the highest possible score is 70. Could I have added 3 more sections on cutscenes, characters, and I don't know, items? Sure. Do I want to add another 10 to 15,000 words to this just to make it an even 100? No. No, I do not. So if the number seems small, that's because it's out of 7, not 10. I did do the conversion, so all of these are 80% or above, so don't worry, they're all at least a B when compared to one another. KH1 comes in at a 7 for its stiff but still fun combat, a 9 for rather interesting level design, an 8 for its straightforward yet still kinda vague story structure, an 8 for its bare bones enemy design, a 9 for the Disney feels, a 7 for its bosses since they're so mechanically simple, and an 8 in music because it has fairly decent tracks all the way through, but none that stick out for more than a few minutes, giving us a grand total of 56 out of 70, which is roughly 81%. KH2 gets an 8 for combat, held back from a 10 by the drive form grinding, a 5 for bare bones level design, a 9 in its structure and dim feels, a 9 for its enemy design since the reaction command system really added a flair to them. In the Disney department, it gets an 8 because while the worlds are accurate, they're just kind of boring to explore. A 9 in the boss department because again, those commands do make a difference. And finally, we have a 7 in music because while it has about 4 or 5 tracks that stick out, a lot of them just fall by the wayside and don't make me feel much of anything. This gives us a total of 55 out of 70, which is roughly 80%. And for KH3, we get a 9 in the slapback that is this game's combat, an 8 in the frankly creative level design despite the 2 levels being basically hallways, another 9 in its story that makes me cry constantly, 7 in the enemy department since the unversed look kinda weird, an 8 in the Disney aesthetics because the levels really lend themselves to being accurate and interesting at the same time, even if there aren't that many secrets, a 7 in the bosses since the variety is rather lacking, and, unlike the other 2 games, there's actually a boss I want to fucking kill in the game's base story, and finally, another 9 in music because 95% of the tracks in this game hit and the opening theme is still worth a listen after 3 years, which I can't really say for either of the other 2, which brings us to the grand total of 57 out of 70, which is about an 82%. I know, big shocker, the guy who has a 3-hour video on why KH3 is good has it be the winner, but honestly I did try to be fair here. Out of these 3 games, I take the least umbrage with 3, I have the least problems with 3, I have the most fun blitzing through 3, I have the best time in 3, and this was before Remind was added, mind you. I just like the boys in this game the most. I like the level design, I love the character interactions, the worlds are really fun and I genuinely have very few notes on 3. 2, I can talk about its faults for hours because people typically don't. The only person I've ever seen discuss KH2's problems in great detail is Bloody Biscuits, and while I personally think he's rather myopic in his approach to what makes a good game, basically anything that doesn't immediately snap you to the ground, oh but wait, that's also bad, he at least makes points on what he's talking about and explains them thoroughly enough that I can see how he got there. It's wrong and doesn't make sense like with the air slide thing, but at least he makes a good argument even if I disagree with it, much like how all of you might disagree with me. Maybe I'm being too generous to 3 and slagging on 2, I don't know, I did try to be fair here. I mean, look how close 1 came to winning everything. Regular Pat would be proud, I think. But regardless, we have our winner, and boy howdy does he deserve a win for once. I hope you all enjoyed this project. It was fun looking at each game critically at the same time and getting to see how they really stack up. I have another one on Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance in the works right now, and I hope you all stick around for that one. My name is Chris, and I hope you all have a fractastic day.